All right, get ready, because today we are diving deep into some major news in the DeFi world. Uniswap, the king of decentralized exchanges, just announced that they're launching their own blockchain.
Oh, wow.
It's called Unichain.
Wow, that's big news. I mean, we see new blockchains popping up all the time, but
Right.
this is Uniswap. They don't just do things for the hype.
Yeah, they're definitely strategic about it. And to understand why they're doing this, we have to look at what problems they're trying to solve.
Okay, so what are we looking at today?
Well, our source material is a fantastic interview from Bankless. They talked with Hayden Adams, the founder of Uniswap, and Carl Flourish from Optimism.
I saw that one.
And they made some really interesting points about the challenges facing DeFi, especially on Ethereum.
Yeah, Ethereum, the OG of smart contracts, but it's expensive.
So tell me about it.
And it's slow. It's like
Right, for sure.
trying to drive a Ferrari through rush hour traffic.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Not very efficient.
Right, so that's where these layer 2 solutions come in, right? They're like those express lanes that bypass the traffic.
Exactly. And that's what Optimism is all about. Faster, cheaper transactions.
Right.
But built on top of Ethereum security.
So we get the best of both worlds.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. With all these different L2s popping up, we're starting to see another problem. Fragmentation.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like having your money scattered across different banks with different rules and fees.
Exactly. Right now, you have to jump through hoops and pay a bunch of fees just to move your assets between different chains.
So where does Unichain fit into all of this?
Well, Unichain is aiming to be the solution to that fragmentation problem.
Oh,
Think of it as the DeFi Grand Central Station.
I like that.
It's designed to be that central hub where transactions are fast, cheap, and seamless, regardless of which L2 you're coming from.
So it's like bringing that Ethereum level security to the speed and convenience of those L2 express lanes. That's a pretty big deal.
It is. And they're not stopping there. Unichain is actually a key part of this grand vision for a superchain.
The superchain. Tell me more about that.
It's this idea of having a network of interconnected L2s, all built on the same technology and speaking the same language.
So no more jumping through hoops to move your assets between chains?
Ideally, no more hoops, no more exorbitant fees, just a smooth and unified experience across the entire Ethereum ecosystem.
That's a pretty bold vision, but I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do they plan to actually pull this off? What's the technology behind Unichain that makes it so fast and efficient?
Well, in the interview, Hayden Adams made a really good analogy.
Okay.
He compared blockchains to servers. If you have one server trying to handle all the traffic, it's going to get overloaded and slow down.
Yeah, makes
But if you have multiple servers that can share the load, then everything runs much smoother. So Unichain is basically like creating a dedicated high-speed server specifically for DeFi.
Okay, so it's not just another blockchain. It's a purpose-built platform for DeFi.
Exactly. And that's where those flash blocks come in.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to ask about those.
Those are like mini blocks within the main Unichain blocks, and they allow for almost instant transaction confirmations.
So if I'm buying a token on Unichain, the transaction is basically confirmed before I can even blink.
Pretty much. It's that fast.
Yeah.
And to make sure it's secure, they're using something called Trusted Execution Environments, or TEs.
Okay, I have to admit that sounds a little intimidating. What exactly are those?
Think of them as secure, isolated compartments within the blockchain where transactions are verified. It's like having a vault within a vault.
Double the security. I like that. But all this tech talk, what does it actually mean for the average user? Is it really going to be that much easier to use DeFi on Unichain?
That's the goal. The idea is to make it feel like you're using one seamless platform. You should be able to buy any token from any chain without worrying about high fees or complex processes.
So it's like the Amazon of DeFi. I can just browse, click, and I'm done.
Exactly. And here's another interesting bit. The UNI token is going to play a big role in the Unichain ecosystem.
So what's in store for the UNI token?
Holders will be able to participate in something called the Unichain Verification Service, which basically means they can help secure the network and earn rewards.
Oh, wow. So it's like being a security guard for the network and getting paid in UNI? That's pretty cool. But I'm sure not everyone is thrilled about this. What are some of the criticisms of Unichain?
Well, some people are worried that it's just adding to the problem of fragmentation by creating yet another chain.
That's a fair point. I mean, they're trying to solve fragmentation with another fragment.
Right. But as we talked about earlier, Hayden and Carl's argument is that Unichain is a stepping stone to that superchain, which will ultimately lead to a more unified experience.
So they're playing the long game here. Okay, I can see that. But how do they answer those users who are hesitant to move their assets to yet another new chain?
Well, Hayden's point was that users shouldn't even have to think about which chain their assets are on. It should just work seamlessly in the background, like the internet.
Ah, okay. So you don't think about which server or website is hosted on, you just visit the website. I get it.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's the level of simplicity they're aiming for.
Ambitious. But what about those other L2s like Arbitrum?
Yeah,
Can we really expect them all to work together to create this unified Ethereum experience?
that's a good question. Carl was actually quite optimistic about this.
Really?
He believes that as these ecosystems mature, they'll naturally start to work together more closely because it benefits everyone in the long run.
So it's kind of like the early days of the internet where there were all these computing technologies.
Yeah,
But eventually the best ideas won out and created the connected web we have today.
exactly. And remember, they all have a shared goal. They want to scale Ethereum and make it the dominant platform for decentralized applications.
Right, so they all win if Ethereum wins. Okay, that makes sense. But there's also this debate about whether DeFi should stay on Ethereum's mainnet or move to L2s like Unichain. What's your take on that?
It's a tough question. On one hand, you have the security and decentralization of Ethereum's mainnet.
Hmm.
On the other hand, you have the scalability and user-friendliness of L2s.
So it's like choosing between Fort Knox and a speedboat.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And what was really interesting was Hayden's perspective. He actually thinks that Ethereum's mainnet should focus on what it does best, being a highly secure settlement layer.
So like the bedrock that everything else is built on top of.
Exactly. And he argues that trying to cram all DeFi activity onto the mainnet just isn't sustainable. It's like trying to fit all the world's traffic onto a single highway.
Yeah, that's a recipe for gridlock for sure.
You need more roads, or in this case, more chains, to handle the increasing volume.
Right. But don't some people worry that moving DeFi to L2s will weaken Ethereum's mainnet?
Some do, but Hayden actually argues that it will make the mainnet more valuable,
Okay, how so?
because all those L2s will need to rely on the mainnet for security and data availability.
So the more people use these L2s, the more valuable Ethereum's mainnet becomes.
Exactly. It's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. It really feels like we're at a pivotal moment in the evolution of finance.
Absolutely.
And it's incredible to see all the innovation and experimentation happening.
It's definitely an exciting time to be in this space.
Yeah.
And speaking of innovation, we can't forget about Uniswap v4, which is also on the horizon.
Oh, right. That's right. Details are still a bit scarce, but it's going to be a major upgrade.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see how all these developments, Unichain, V4, the superchain, all come together to shape the future of Uniswap and DeFi as a whole.
Well said. And it's important to remember that we're still in the early days of this technology. There's so much more to come.
Absolutely.
But before we get too carried away, I want to bring it back to our listener. What's the one thing you want them to take away from all of this?
I think the key takeaway is this: the launch of Unichain is not just about creating another blockchain.
Right.
It's about tackling the challenges of scalability, fragmentation, and user experience head on. It's about creating a DeFi ecosystem that's accessible, efficient, and user-friendly for everyone.
And that's a vision worth getting excited about.
So jumping back into Unichain, it's like, I think it's important to acknowledge that, not everyone is convinced this is the right move.
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely some valid criticisms out there. Some
Okay.
people think this might not be the solution.
Exactly. Not everyone's on board the hype train just yet.
So what are some of the main arguments against Unichain?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is that, isn't this just making the fragmentation problem worse?
Right.
Like they're launching another chain to fix the problem of too many chains.
Yeah, it seems kind of counterintuitive when you put it like that.
Right. It's like, trying to organize your closet by adding another shelf,
Yeah.
but then you just have more space to fill with stuff.
Exactly. So how do Hayden and Carl address this?
Well, they emphasize that Unichain isn't meant to be just another isolated chain. It's supposed to be a stepping stone towards this super chain idea.
Right, the superchain, we talked about that in part 1. But how does that reassure users who might be hesitant to, jump onto another new chain?
Well, Hayden made a really interesting point about user experience. He said, ideally, users shouldn't even have to think about which chain they're on. It should all just work seamlessly in the background.
Ah, I see. So it's like how we use the internet. You don't think about the specific servers hosting the websites you visit. You just click a link and you're there.
Exactly. And as more chains adopt those shared standards and protocols, it becomes easier and cheaper to move assets between them, so
Yeah.
ultimately creating a smoother, more unified experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. But let's be real. Can we really expect all these different L2 ecosystems like Arbitrum to play nicely together and actually create this, unified Ethereum experience?
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah.
Right. And you know what? Carl was actually pretty optimistic about this.
Oh, really?
He believes that as these ecosystems mature, they'll naturally gravitate towards these shared standards
Hey.
and interoperability solutions.
Hmm.
It just makes sense, from a technological and economic standpoint.
Because it benefits everyone in the long run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of how the internet itself evolved, right?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day,
Yeah.
there were all these competing protocols and platforms.
Uh-huh.
But eventually, the best ideas won out, and that's how we got to the interconnected web we have today.
Yeah, that's a good point. History often repeats itself, especially in the tech world. And at the end of the day, they all have the same goal. They want to make Ethereum the dominant platform for decentralized applications.
Exactly. And a rising tide lifts all boats.
I like that. But let's shift gears a bit here and talk about this ongoing debate about where DeFi should live. Should it stay on Ethereum's mainnet or move to these L2s like Unichain? That's a tough question, right?
It is a tough question. On the one hand, you have that security and decentralization of the mainnet.
Right.
On the other hand, you have the scalability and user experience of L2s.
Yeah, it's almost like choosing between like Fort Knox and a speedboat. One is super secure but slow, and the other is fast and nimble but maybe not as fortified.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And Hayden's perspective on this was really interesting.
Okay, what'd he say?
He actually thinks Ethereum's mainnet should focus on what it does best, being that highly secure settlement layer for the entire ecosystem.
Ah, okay. So kind of like that bedrock we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
It's that foundation for everything built on top of it.
Right. And he argues that trying to cram all DeFi activity onto the mainnet just isn't going to work long term. It would be like, I don't know, trying to fit all the world's internet traffic through a single cable.
Right. Total system overload. You need more cables, or in this case, more chains to handle all that data.
Yeah, precisely. But doesn't that make Ethereum's mainnet less valuable then?
That's what some critics argue. Yeah. Like, if everything moves to L2s, what's the point of the mainnet?
Well, Hayden actually argued the opposite. He said that a strong L2 ecosystem will actually increase demand for data availability on the mainnet. So basically, the more people use these L2s, the more valuable the mainnet becomes.
Okay, so it's like a symbiotic relationship. The L2s need the mainnet for security, and the mainnet needs the L2s for growth.
Exactly. It all works together.
Wow, it's really fascinating to see how this is all playing out. It's messy, but it's also super exciting.
I know, right?
There's so much happening, and it's hard to predict where it's all going.
It really is. But speaking of exciting developments, we can't forget about Uniswap v4, right?
Oh, right. That's true. We briefly touched on it earlier, but what can you tell us about it? I know details are still pretty hush-hush.
Yeah, they're keeping things pretty close to the vest. But it's shaping up to be a major upgrade to the whole Uniswap platform.
It seems like the Uniswap team is always pushing the boundaries and trying new things.
Definitely, they're not afraid to experiment.
Well, that's what makes the space so dynamic.
Right.
And all these developments, Unichain, V4, the superchain, it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
It will. And it's important to remember that we're still in those early stages of this technology. There's so much more to come.
Absolutely. But before we dive into the next part, I want to shift the focus a little bit.
Okay.
We've been talking a lot about, the tech behind Unichain and those implications for DeFi, but at the end of the day, this is all about people, right?
It is. It's about how this tech can impact our lives.
Exactly. So what do you think the biggest impact of Unichain will be for, everyday users if it actually achieves its goals?
I think if Unichain succeeds, it could be a really big step toward bringing DeFi to the masses.
Okay.
Imagine a world where, it's just as easy to swap tokens or earn interest on your crypto as it is to use, like a Venmo or Apple Pay.
So it's like that moment when the internet went from being this niche thing for techies to something everyone was using.
Right. DeFi needs that kind of aha moment where it just clicks for people.
Yeah, I get that. But we've got to be realistic. There are still some pretty big hurdles to overcome before we get there.
Oh, definitely.
For one, the user experience still needs a lot of work, right?
Yeah, right now interacting with DeFi apps can feel pretty clunky and intimidating.
Yeah.
You need a PhD in computer science just to figure out how to use them.
Right. And it reminds me of the early days of personal computers. They had so much potential, but you had to be a programmer to use them.
Yeah.
And then Apple came along with those user-friendly interfaces,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, everyone wanted a computer.
Right, exactly. DeFi needs that kind of user-friendly revolution.
Totally agree. And then there's regulation.
Well,
Governments are still trying to figure out how to deal with all of this.
definitely a big question mark.
Mhm.
Will they encourage innovation or try to stifle it? Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to say. But clear and consistent regulations will be crucial, to protect consumers and foster responsible growth.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the potential impact on, like, the developing world, right?
Oh, yeah.
There are millions of people who don't even have access to basic financial services.
Exactly.
DeFi could be a real game changer for them.
Think about it, being able to send money across borders instantly with very low fees, or access microloans without needing a credit score.
Right. DeFi has the potential to really empower people.
Totally agree. And Unichain, with its emphasis on scalability and user-friendliness, could really help make DeFi more accessible and impactful, for people all over the world.
Yeah, for sure. It's an exciting possibility.
It is. But before we wrap up this part, I want to get a little personal. What excites you the most about this technology? What are your own hopes for the future of DeFi?
What really gets me excited is that potential to create a more open and transparent and equitable financial system. A system that empowers individuals rather than, like, those big institutions.
I think that's a sentiment shared by a lot of people in the DeFi space. It's not just about the technology itself, it's about building a better world with it.
Exactly. And that's what I find so compelling about it. It's not just about making money, it's about making a difference.
I love that. All right, well, let's pause here and pick back up in part 3, where we'll explore some of the specific questions and takeaways from this deep dive into Unichain. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into Unichain.
It's been a wild ride so far.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground, from the technical intricacies to the philosophical implications.
Yeah, we've gone deep on those pros and cons.
We have. And now for this last part, I want to shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And get a little more speculative.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If Unichain actually delivers on its promises, what could this mean for the financial world as a whole? Like, zoom out, big picture stuff.
Ooh, that's a big question.
It is a big question, but that's what we're here for.
I love it. Okay, so big picture. Well, if they pull this off, I really think this could be the tipping point that brings DeFi to the mainstream.
Like that moment when the internet went from being a niche thing to something everyone was using.
Exactly. Remember when you had to explain to people what email was?
Oh, I remember those days.
Now everyone's using it.
Right. So you're saying DeFi needs that kind of aha moment where it just clicks for the average person.
Exactly. And I think Unichain has the potential to make that happen.
Because it's focusing on user experience.
Right, and scalability and making things more intuitive.
So imagine a world where it's as easy to swap tokens or earn interest on your crypto as it is to use, like Venmo or Apple Pay.
Exactly. That's the dream.
That's a pretty compelling vision, I have to admit.
Right.
But let's be real, there are some serious obstacles to overcome before we get there.
Oh, for sure. There are still some big challenges ahead.
Like,
well, first and foremost, the user experience still has a long way to go.
right. Like, right now, interacting with DeFi apps can be pretty intimidating for the average person.
It's true. Sometimes it feels like you need a computer science degree just to figure out how to use them.
It reminds me of those old computers back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Before Apple came along with their user-friendly interfaces.
Oh, you practically needed to be a programmer just to turn the things on.
Exactly. DeFi needs that kind of revolution, where it becomes so easy to use that anyone can do it.
Agreed. And then there's the whole issue of regulation.
Ugh, yeah, that's a big one.
Governments are still trying to figure out how to handle crypto and DeFi.
Right. It's a bit of a Wild West out there.
It is, and it makes things unpredictable. Will they support innovation or try to stifle it?
Good question. Hopefully they'll find a way to balance those interests and create clear guidelines that protect consumers while also fostering innovation.
Fingers crossed. But you know what else I think is really important to consider?
What's that?
The potential impact of DeFi on the developing world.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about that a bit earlier, but it's worth emphasizing.
Yeah.
Millions of people around the world lack access to basic financial services.
It's a huge problem, and DeFi could offer real solutions.
Imagine being able to send money across borders instantly and with minimal fees.
Right. Or being able to access microloans without needing a traditional credit score.
DeFi could be a game changer for financial inclusion on a global scale.
It could really empower people in a way that's never been possible before.
It's pretty inspiring to think about.
It is. And Unichain, with its focus on scalability and user-friendliness, could play a big role in making those dreams a reality.
So, looking back at everything we've discussed today, what's the key takeaway for our listener? What's the one thing you really want them to remember?
I think the most important takeaway is that the launch of Unichain isn't just about creating another blockchain.
Yeah, okay.
It's about taking DeFi to the next level.
Right, making it more accessible, efficient, and user-friendly. It's about realizing the full potential of this technology.
It's about creating a more open, transparent, and equitable financial system for everyone.
Well said. And that's what I find so exciting about this space.
You too.
It's not just about the tech, it's about the possibilities.
It's about building a better future.
And that's a mission worth supporting. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Unichain.